Afternoon, everybody.
Hey, Sandy, how you doing?
Good. Bit chilly, but good.
Right. I've been out, so I don't know.
No, it's cold up here. Let me tell you, it's very chilly. So,
Yeah. Well, we'll just give it another minute, but while we're waiting, Jack, Melissa, Dodgers just did it. Just
I
did it.
was about to message you before and say, this is a high tension way to start the LDP today, but I know I'm glad. I was keeping an eye on it for you. So we spoke too soon the other day.
We did. Wow, what a comeback.
Didn't I say from the beginning? Didn't I say I think they've got it in the bag? Well,
Well,
I don't want to jinx anything, but hey, that's very impressive to come back from where they were this time last week.
yeah, and fortunately, Tampa Bay had a really tough series as well. So both teams, Tampa Bay's got one extra day's rest, but that's nothing.
Mm,
So yeah, fingers crossed. Now it's a whole new game of 7, but it's great to get there again.
for sure. You're being kept on your toes with all your sports this year.
Oh yeah,
Mhm.
yeah. Too many months without anything, and then it got going.
Exactly.
All right, everybody. That was a massive 10 for me just now. The Dodgers getting into the World Series. I wanted to start with Dr. Fred's 10s and just ask you all, following on from the exercise, you've now had a few days since then, whether it's in your brain, whether you're doing anything about it, whether you've continued on, whether you're thinking about them, just give me whatever feedback that you've got. I'd be interested to hear.
Well and truly, Bradley, I think it's like a motivational thing also now, that you can sort of look at something that you want to do, or, that sort of might be a little bit of a splurge or something, and then you can sort of put it in context. If I do X, then the reward if I do that is Y. So it's being sort of more mindful of, things that you want, and to achieve them is, what a stretch it is or what it might be, but using it as a sort of like a reward, a bit of a carrot to get there.
Good. And that's what, motivation is. Interestingly, if you work with Dr. Fred, he's a really big one about rewarding yourself and giving yourself the small victories and recognizing the good things you do. And, I remember, I think I wrote it in my book, second book, but when I renovated houses, we'd always have a celebration after finishing another room. It's such a big effort. And then, make sure you enjoy yourself, or after hard days renovating, to go out to the beach or go somewhere nice for a few hours. Because if you don't, enjoy the journey, it can make the destination not that enjoyable either. Who else?
I found it interesting. I did this. I do it every year at the start of every year, and obviously, not a lot of it was applicable that I wrote down at the start of this year. So it was good. I had to go back and sort of predict what I'm going to be able to do this year, and a few things got crossed out, because we can't do them at the moment.
Yeah. Good. Others?
Yeah, Bradley, I found that it put into perspective when I can get things done. By putting a date on the goal, I found that things seemed more doable instead of just something that was constantly there. Gee, I'd like to do that someday. Putting an actual timeline on it was really helpful.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. Timelines make a real difference. It sort of forces you to a point. Again, with the renovating, I might have mentioned this before, but we always would arrange a party to force us to get to the renovation done to a certain level before that party date. And it always drove us to get the house done. I've renovated 7 houses, so it's a big job. And giving yourself that time frame or that year or that date that you want to do something really does help you to bring it on. Well,
For me, Bradley, it made me realize what especially the 10s were, and start prioritizing them a bit better, especially during a work day. I have a little bit of guilt if I feel like I said last week in my example, my husband will ring me when he finishes at 4:30, excited to talk to me, and I always would be busy or on a call or would have booked a Zoom meeting. And a few days last week, I made sure I was available, and I took the call, and it made me so happy. And it's something so small, but yeah, I think doing the exercise, it kind of let me give myself permission to allow myself to focus on those things simultaneously with work as well.
And did it take away from your work effectiveness?
No, not at all. So yeah, it was good. It made me realize that it should be prioritized. While it's not a huge thing in the day, it does make me happy. So that and a few other things I've tried to include in my day where prior I kind of let them sit on the back burner.
Yeah. Well, like, I wanted to watch Game 7 of the Dodgers today. I didn't want anyone to ruin it for me, which happens routinely. Despite my best efforts to not find out results, I hear them. And so I was on to my emails and working at 7 this morning so I could get a lot of things done, knowing I was going to take a couple hours off this afternoon and speed watch the game, which is what I do. I sort of speed through all the delays. You got to take that time to enjoy yourself, and it doesn't affect you if you plan and do it well. Other comments?
I actually chose to share it with other people, the concept with other people.
Yeah.
I've done a bit of walking over the weekend, a bit of exercise over the weekend, and 2 sets of girlfriends I've actually chose to make it a discussion point while we were walking, because we walked for a couple of hours. And it was really interesting to hear what other people's 10s were and what their 25s and 75s were. So it was actually interesting to open up a discussion with other people and just see what their thoughts on it were and how they motivate themselves, and how, just even having the conversation motivates them to move in a different direction, because I'm pretty motivated most of the time anyway. So, but yeah, the 75s were definitely something that we all spoke about, because we're all pretty moment people.
The whole idea of sharing these things, and particularly like 10s with friends, and I've done the same with family and friends, is obviously it helps other people, but it also makes you more tied to it. You sort of preach it a bit, you start to believe it, you share it with your friends. Then when you're talking to them and they say, hey, what's your 10s today? Or you got any 25s coming up? It sort of makes you ingrain it a little bit more into your own system, so you actually do it. So I think sharing this with friends and colleagues is a really powerful thing to do. And, for example, Ian, you guys have your weekly meetings in Blackburn, as in the salespeople, Melissa, in your offices, everyone, sharing this with your team, running a 10 or 15 minute session during one of the sales meetings is a powerful thing. It helps you to understand it better. It helps other people to go, oh, wow, that could really be positive for me. Or I really could see how it helped my wife at the moment, or my kids, or whoever, So yeah, I'm a big believer in that, Sandy. And I think you probably, by sharing it, you probably feel a little bit more tied to it now anyway. We've had some more people join the meeting. Anyone else want to comment about their 10s experience so far, their 10s to 100s?
Hi, Bradley, it's me.
Hi, Michelle.
Yes, for the 25, for this 25, and then I have been sharing this idea with my partner, because there's about to setting a goal, because we all have the time frame. Say in 8 years we retire, so we now we setting a goal. Say we buy another investment property, and then like can in a certain time frame to get to the time, and then we can retire. So for these 25 things, and it's really helping us, and then to have this kind of the motivation. Yeah.
Right. And that would be
really like that.
That would be 100, a tax deductible investment property. Definitely 100. Very good. Excellent.
Yeah.
Anyone else want to comment? Okay. We started on feedback last week, and I asked you guys, hang on, I just got to tick a box. Okay, I asked you guys as an exercise between then and now is to write yourself out a plan having to give feedback to someone. Many of you have been in a situation where you've received feedback. Some of you are in a position where you've had to give feedback as well. And be interesting to start to sort of talk about that feedback. So I'm just going to quickly recap the idea around feedback, and I'm not showing the whole thing, but you know, this idea is you start with where you want to get to, your vision, you feedback during the day, and then you self-correct as a result from dinner, you know, and that applies to your plan for the whole year or a plan for an individual. You know, it certainly makes sense to me. And feedback's really the key. So this is what somebody should do, make sure they understand what it is. Maybe work from there to see if there's agreement in that, you know, what could our plan be? Just the usual thing. But the planning and thinking through a feedback session is where we sort of should focus, and what I asked you guys to do with your time off in that task 8. So, you know, it's like anything, it's really helpful to summarize where we're going, why we're having this conversation, what we hope to achieve from it, begin with the end in mind. Supporting points, we talked about how some people are really into detail, some people aren't. Some people, it's important to show examples. Some people will just use examples to try to defend themselves and say, well, that's not a good example for this reason or that reason. And you know, so I pick and choose how I deal with that when I'm having conversations with people. What do I really have to cover? What are the key points here that I'm really trying to get across? And when giving feedback, like when a journalist is interviewing a politician who've all been trained on giving an interview, they'll just repeat their main point. No matter what's asked, they're going to make their main point, and they're going to use 3 supporting comments to support that point. And it doesn't matter what they're asked. They're just going to keep repeating the same parts because that's what they want to get across. When you're giving a talk, it's the same thing. If you try to talk about too many things, you can lose your audience. But if you focus on the key points and the key supporting points to those points, then you'll do better. Same thing when giving feedback. You know, sticking to the main theme, trying to keep it as focused as possible on what you're really trying to get across. As you're talking to somebody, you can see the wheels going on in their head and they're not really listening because they're digesting what you've already said, or they're thinking about their comeback. You know, I've had people in my office and I can say, look, stop. I know you're not listening. All you're doing is thinking about what I'm trying to get across to you and what you're going to say in defense. Just stop, because you're not listening. You have to, and you can see it in their head and their eyes, you know. So you want to keep it as simple as possible in a way. You know, how long is this going to go for? How much time do we need to make sure we set aside the right amount of time for them to digest and comment back? And are we going to just give information and ask them to go away and think about it? And, you know, what's the best way to, in the order, what's the best way to actually present this to them? What's going to have the most impact? How am I going to get all this across? What do I need in support? All these things build towards having a more effective conversation with someone than just jumping in and hoping for the best, which is not necessarily the best way to do it. So in the summary of that, we've got this idea of, all right, I'm going to put my structure together. If I need notes, I'll put those notes together. I want to use the P's, being, you know, positive, precise, pertinent, you know, keep it, give the person as little wiggle room as possible. The more you say and the more you carry on, then the more opportunity there is for them to dispute what you're saying, to get lost in a tangent, for you to go on a tangent yourself. Remember, you know, being positive about delivering things to help people get better. You know, you give feedback, you know, ultimately 2 reasons, and most of it, I'm going to say, you know, 5/6 of the time, it's because you want to help the person to get better. The 6th of the time, you've decided that there's nothing that's going to fix this person, and this feedback is designed to be a, you know, a next step out the door, and that happens. But you would have already had several feedback sessions prior, trying to get them to do what you need. It may well be, again, that you need some supporting stuff. You might need graphs or visual aids. You might need whatever. What do you need to get it across? Whatever else you can think about. And if need be, if you're not good at this, you haven't done a lot of it, then giving a little bit of a rehearse as to what you're going to say and what might their responses be. What if they don't agree with you? What are you going to do? What if they do agree with you? Where to from here? How are we going to carry this on to the next meeting? What am I asking you to do to go away before you come back? These are all the sort of things you have to think about to have the most effective chance of getting the outcome you want from that discussion. And usually it's about some form of improvement, and that's why you do it, or else you probably wouldn't do it. So I asked you guys over the weekend since Wednesday to now, to work out a feedback plan, to write down what you would do if you had to give somebody feedback, whether it be a coworker or a family member, whatever it might be, often family members. And they're harder because, logic doesn't always apply to family members. Often it's just emotion and stuff. And I've learned that a long time ago. You can't apply some same business skills at home as you can at work. I'd like your feedback on what you experienced in trying to write this, what questions that you have, some of the key points that you've got, rather than just telling me what your plan is, because I don't want to hear that so much, but really about what your thought process was in doing it. Good exercise, helpful, easy, hard. What do you want to know? What questions do you have? All those things. So go ahead, whoever would like to start. I'd like to spend a few minutes on this and see where you guys got to.
Bradley, it's Mike.
Hi, Mike.
I found this really useful, actually, just to have that structure, and I actually applied it to potential vendor meeting where you're giving feedback, perhaps about price, perhaps about how the campaign's operating, and it gives a very good structure to go through that. And I think, as you said before, if they're analytical, having that supporting evidence there to help the cause. But yeah, I actually found that structure really good.
Excellent. And on Wednesday, we're doing communication and then DISC. And that 2 hours is a really powerful couple hours on getting much better at doing exactly that, communicating in tough situations and so forth. Who else has comments?
Bradley,
Yeah.
I felt that I had to sit down. The first item says decide what you're going to say. I found that first I had to understand what I wanted to say and why I wanted to say it. What was the reason that I was giving this feedback? What was I hoping to accomplish from it? So I found that it was following those steps was really useful to come up with a dialogue, and I ended up writing out the dialogue so that I could do the rehearsing. And also when it says decide how you're going to say it, obviously the opening line will set the tone sometimes for the whole meeting, I guess. I found it very useful. I'm still working on it, didn't finish it. And what you just said before about the next session being on communication, I'm looking forward to doing that so that I can use it in conjunction with this.
Yeah, what you said is basically by what I want to achieve by this begin with the end in mind. And that's the most powerful of the 7 habits for this exercise, for sure. What am I trying to achieve? Like, why am I having this feedback with this person? Why am I making this effort? What do I really want to get out of it? What's the outcome?
Yeah.
Do I want them to lift their game? Do I want them to add some things to what they do? Do I want them to recognize how great they've been? Do I want them to completely lift their game or else, depart? There's lots of parts to that. And that's really what that whole exercise is about. Like you get lost sometimes in you can also get lost in giving a talk. Like, that's why this idea of at the very beginning, what am I trying to achieve? The middle is just telling them this is what I said I was going to achieve, and I'm going to cover all these things. And then at the end is re-summarizing. I told you this is what I was going to say, and now I've said it. And that's the same thing with this. I've seen so many times that you start out with this idea that somebody needs to lift or this, and then by the time you've written everything and thought of everything, you forgot the whole reason why, and you get caught up in all these examples and all this stuff, which isn't really the objective. And so that's a good point, Jacqueline. Melissa?
Yeah, it's very similar to Jacqueline, my feedback. It made me rethink the language I would go into a meeting where feedback had to be given. For me, it's more so in a HR role. Yeah, it made me think about my approach, the wording that would allow it to start in a way that's positive and constructive, rather than, like Jacqueline said, the opening sets the tone. And if that isn't not right or wrong, but if that isn't, right for the person you're dealing with at that time, you will not have a productive meeting. It's not going to go the way either of you want it. So it made me really realize the difference it would make preparing in advance, as opposed to, like you said the other day, catching someone on a whim, or they happen to be in your office for something else and you go, oh, while you're here, putting that thought and time into it beforehand, I think would make it so much more effective. And that's what I found in doing this anyway.
Yeah, that being proactive and planning it is certainly going to be a massive help in getting the right outcome. But also, remember we talked about, and we'll do this in communications, but you can say whatever you want. It's how the other person is going to receive it. And if they're not in the right frame of mind to have feedback and to receive it and digest it and analyze it and then, and have a plan, then it doesn't mean that doesn't work either. So when you catch somebody on the hop,
yeah,
and they're not ready either. I mean, they're still thinking about other stuff. And Sally and I both have this thing with, or my wife, we both are, we're always thinking, we're always doing things, and neither of us is going to start a conversation with just start talking. We always say, are you listening? Because like you're not talking for the sake of it.
Yeah.
And not taking any offense to it. It just means, all right, I'm ready. Tell me, what do you want to talk to me about? And the same, because I can see she's doing stuff, and I'll say, when you're ready, I want to tell you something. It's just getting people in the frame of mind. But what I've watched in feedback for years and years, and trust me, I'm going back to 1986. I've been someone who people have come to deal with issues, and I'll say to them, so this person isn't performing. Have you told them? Oh yeah, a number of times. And tell me, how explicit you've been and what's the circumstance. Oh, they tell me. And then when I meet with the person who's the subject matter, they say, I've never heard this before. This is all new to me. I've heard that so many times, right? And I'm going to put it mostly down to, and I mean this, that it's said in too informal, too much of a fleeting situation where people haven't taken it in as meaning anything other than a little tiny correction.
Yeah.
And that's that issue of catching somebody on the hop or walking by their desk and saying, hey, could you straighten up your desk? Whatever doesn't have the impact of calling them into your office and saying, or even ahead of time saying, look, I'd like to have a chat with you at 3 o'clock today about some things I've been saving up. 3 o'clock, they come in your office and you say, look, you work in such a messy environment that it causes everyone else a bit of an issue, like whatever, just whatever the example is. They'll hear it.
Yeah.
But when you walk by their desk and they're doing other stuff and you just throw something at them, or you're talking about a vendor meeting and then you give them some sort of correction that they should be focusing on, they never hear that. They don't hear it, they don't believe it, they don't take it in, and later on they'll say, I never heard that before. You can't know how many times I've had that happen, but also times where I know that somebody has been given direct feedback. In fact, I've given people direct feedback where they've then come back in the subsequent meeting and say, I've never heard this before. And I say, well, you have.
Yeah.
And this is exactly what was said to you, and you clearly weren't listening. So it's not always the case, but you have a much greater chance of having this. And then if you follow it up with a file note, particularly if it's employment related, you have to, but even if you follow up with a file note to say, it was great to catch up today. Some of the key points we talked about that I'd like you to be mindful of are X, Y, and Z, then it's going to really reinforce those comments, because when people see things in writing, it even further reinforces that message.
For sure. That's what I took from it.
Excellent. What else? Who else had issues? Yeah.
Sarah, sorry I was late today. Just following on from what you said, I haven't really sort of written a feedback plan, but in the past when I've had to do it, certainly in the preparation, it is helpful to write some notes to make sure that you cover the points that you're intending to cover, because whilst you might be able to, you know, have a bit of an idea of how that person's going to respond to the feedback, they may surprise you and it might take you into a tangent from an area away from what you actually wanted to talk about. But following on from what you just said, one of the biggest things that I found most helpful when having to give feedback is the follow-up after, to ensure that you're both on the same page in terms of, probably more so when it's negative feedback that they probably don't want to hear if it's an employee that's maybe not performing. But if it's good feedback, then you can actually say, well, here's a wrap up of our conversation and these are the action points that I'm going to take that I expect you to take. And then everyone's clear about their position. And, you know, like you said with the file note, those are the best things. Well, A, it forces you to make sure that you discuss that particular aspect of their conduct, and you can't just skirt around it. And as you said, Bradley, think that you've actually told them when maybe you haven't, because it's maybe too hard, which, you know, giving feedback isn't the easiest thing all the time. It actually, I think, forces you to make sure you cover those maybe uncomfortable points, and then you can actually put those things down in writing and ensure that they've fully understood. And if there is a point that they don't understand or they disagree with, well, it's not really, you know, and I've actually learned this from Bradley, it's not really the fact that, you know, they either disagree or didn't disagree. It's the fact you've spoken about it and you've brought it up and they're agreeing that you actually did speak about that. They might not agree with it and they may think they're fantastic, but you've actually given them that feedback.
Yeah, I've watched you over the years grow a lot, and so many times you brought your whole feedback plan into my office and read it and showed me what you're going to talk to people about, and I think you do it really well. You know, I think you get to the main point. You have your supporting points when necessary, and that follow up, as you said, is it's really important. You know, and so what Sarah was referring to there is it's a habit I developed long time ago to make the lawyers happy. And that is, when you give somebody employment feedback, i.e. you're not performing, there's some issues here, there could be ramifications here in the future if you don't lift your performance. This might be a warning or it might not be, but here's a document, basically send them an email or a letter, but usually an email, which says, actually, sorry, it's a letter. It's always a letter, but in an email, that's what I meant. Signed by me, and often it'll have, if it's performance related, it has them have to sign and return it. And it says that this is my view of what was discussed today, and I'm asking you to sign it at the end, acknowledging that this is what we discussed. It's not them actually saying, I agree with what you said. The signature part at the bottom says, I agree that the contents of this letter reflects what was discussed today. And that way we're covering ourselves, that nobody can later say, well, I was never told, and, you know, and this didn't happen and all of that. And so that's a real formal, but even just giving people a summary of what was discussed, even if it isn't that much. And sometimes if we're just telling somebody in a light way, as opposed to a warning that there are performance issues here, and we're just bringing them to your attention, it's early in your probation, and we just want you to know that we've got a few concerns around these things. I'll always put that in writing, but it won't be a heavy duty, please acknowledge this, return it, you know. It will be just, hey, just a reminder, these are the things we talked about today, and if I can be of help, please let me know. And I think that reinforcement is very powerful. Anyone else have feedback on the exercise?
I do. This feedback plan actually made me think about, you've probably all heard about it before, the compliment sandwich. You know how you give someone the compliment at the beginning and then you have the constructive criticism in the middle and then the sort of praise at the end. And I would say that with the compliment sandwich, it's obviously something that's sort of debated in the sort of business world and stuff like that as to whether it's effective or not. I would say that there are more factors involved than obviously just 3 elements of a feedback of the conversation, obviously, whether it's with a client or an employee or, your boss or a friend or a family member. But I do think that there is something to the fact that there is times in a conversation where you personalize things and then when you depersonalize things. And, I think that's really important that, whether it's obviously at the start of that, conversation, identifying whether that's something that's performance-based, whether it's work-based or whether it's situational. And I think having that conversation will allow you to, at times, remain objective when you need to be, and obviously provide the facts. And, those are the times where you would depersonalize a conversation. And then there are times, and as what Sarah was saying before, when, you might be having a conversation with an employee and it is performance-based, and that's when then you, tend to personalize things and, have that sort of balance between being emotional, but also being, logistical and stuff as well.
Yeah, it's a classic approach, the sandwich, and when you've counseled someone quite a few times, they go, here comes the sandwich,
Yeah.
but, and, some people, pardon my French, refer to that as a shit sandwich, that, give me shit over this, but, always start with, I believe, where you're heading. If you can give positive feedback, everybody, like if whoever X person comes in your office, there's good things they're doing. And then, but you're talking to them and saying like, there are a lot of really good things about what you do here. And we really do appreciate you being here. We like this, this, and this, but there are some concerns around your performance around these issues. We're going to talk about those. That's our focus today. And then after you've done that and say, look, I just want to remind you that this isn't shipwreck. This isn't all a disaster. There are so many good things we've talked about and about your performance and what you do, but there are some areas you really need to work on. So the positive message out of this is that you're going all right in some ways, but you need to lift your game in some other ways. And I find that that's the way I tend to do it. So, set the stage, then give a positive story, give the constructive criticisms, and then recap in a positive way about that there is good messages, because people, my experience is they don't really hear everything that's said, and you can't know how many people I've said, now listen, and I said this to you guys last week, but listen, there are a lot of positives, and if you walk out of this office not having heard those, that's your fault, not mine, because I've made it very clear to you that there's a lot of positive messages about what you're doing. You may not like all the feedback, and that's fair enough, but there are a lot of good things, and you have to hear those too. A lot of people don't. A lot of people don't hear that. Other comments? Okay, I appreciate that. And if anybody obviously is giving feedback or needs to bounce it off me, feel free. Always happy to help. This is a really super powerful next session that we're doing from Covey about the leadership paradigm we talked about. I think we lost a slide. I'm just gonna go backwards to our, sorry, I do it easier than this, but I think we lost our continuum here. Right, here we go. Oh, goodness, I did back a lot further than I thought. All right, so yeah, sir, we need this again back right after the feedback, or maybe it does come out. We're on to this fourth point about, goodness, it's really hard to drive this at times. All right, so no, Zoom gets in the way of some of it. So the fourth level, this managerial use of talent and this creation of win-win agreements, and making sure that we're using people at this level from a psychological need of using the talent and getting the most effectiveness out of people is what we're really on about now. So how do we work with people? How do we get initiative? How do we get feedback? How do we get them being most productive? How do we get people to be as close to that 100% that they're capable of being every day, right? And that's what we're going to cover. And it's a really interesting way that we do it. And I just wanted to sort of recap that bit before we go into this. So what are we doing? Where do we spend our time? And remember, we talked about the quadrants 1, 2, 3, and 4. And we want to live in quadrant 2, live with 1 and 2, because 1 is a reality that some things are urgent, but they're important. But we want to live in quadrant 2. This is a different breakup of your time, and it's really a powerful thought, you know. So there are 3 ways that we have our time, and that is PML. We're either producing, we're actually doing production, we're managing people because we need to be managing people at times, or we're leading. And in leading, we are doing the things that leaders do. We are creating greater production capacity for ourselves and other people. We're working on our goals and our visions of the future. We're working on getting the right resources put in place. We're growing ourselves. Like right now, we're all in an L position. We're all working on ourselves to become better. And therefore, we're spending time right now in leading L. You're increasing your production capability. Therefore, you're in L time. And when you look at this, and each role is different, and traditionally, as you move up higher and higher in the hierarchy of organizations, you go more and more away from producing, more and more into managing, and then ultimately leading. But in every role, there's all 3 of these. And it just depends on your balance of the position you have. And there's no right or wrong. The wrong only is if you're not living up to what you think your PML should be. You know, like you should be spending more time. For example, I'll give a good example. This isn't happening, but this is a good example. Sarah has a team of people, and she has a role that is a blend of PML. And if she spends too much time on P, i.e. helping the team process listings and write things and post social media and do that, she's not spending enough time on managing the whole team, or particularly leading us into the future where we're going with marketing. So if her PML is out of whack, it's a problem, you know, because she's not doing the ML stuff that is really going to help us be most effective. If you got a team of 10 or 12 people, you better be spending most of your time on M&L, because otherwise, you know, they're in a bit directionless. And I don't mean by reviewing their work. Managing people is helping to work with them on their priorities, their goal settings, helping them to deal with whatever resources they need. You know, it's helping overcome problems, it's removing roadblocks, you know, all those things that happen in the M&L zone. I think people who get a good handle on their PML are the most effective workers and come the closest to leaving every day and saying, I gave 100% of what I was capable of today. You know, I helped 3 different people become more productive today. I helped 5 people get over this. I've resolved 3 or 4 really big issues that were affecting other people, and I'm holding things back. I was just purely head down. Melissa and my sales sec in the office was away, and all day I just was productive. It was just a huge day of producing stuff to help everybody. And I still feel like I was 100 today because I was full on all day, really, really productive. But tomorrow I've got to focus more on my ML to achieve 100 again tomorrow. But today I was doing what I had to do. And so it doesn't just stay the same every day. And the exercise really here is, and you have a task. I don't have the notes right in front of me, but I assume we have a task. Yeah. So we have 2 tasks. Task 9 here is what is your current PML versus what you think it should be? So what is your current, where you're spending your time across the 3 versus what you think in your role, if you were really nailing your role, if you were able to have the people around you say, wow, Bill is the best person in this role we've ever had. What is your ideal PML? And our next exercise is going to be to look at it and go, well, how do we fix it? What do we have to do to actually get from here to there, and whatever that happens to be? So spend a couple of minutes thinking about your current role and how much time you're spending on P things, which is producing. And it's not black and white, you know, sometimes what's the difference between PM and L? You can't always be clear cut, but basically production is stuff you're doing that is getting things done, finishing off things. M is more about helping others, looking at getting rid of roadblocks and problems other people have, supervising people, working out rosters, all those sort of things. And L is really the increasing production capability. It is learning, it's growing, it's providing some vision, it's setting some goals, it's spending time making others really much more productive by bettering a system. It's talking to a supplier to understand something better and then being able to help people to do it. All that stuff would come into your L. So spend a few minutes. What's your ideal versus your current? Okay, everyone. I'd love some feedback about this idea of even what PML means to you, and is that an easy exercise to do? Is it really hard? You know, what are your thoughts about it? And you know, how can we help to further ingrain this PML concept into what you do?
Bradley, I used to work before I started at Fletcher's at a stockbroker, and I think I had the opportunity to do all three of these things. I used to look after a group of what they call desk assistants, and they were people that supported the stockbrokers. And I think a large proportion of that role was actually managing and leading, whereas in my current role, I think I do more producing and probably managing. Yeah, that's how I see it. Probably not the opportunity to lead.
Yes and no. I knew you know, I could have just said your script for you because I knew exactly what you were going to say. Your L comes from improving systems and making things easier for everybody to do what they do. But you are primarily in a producing role without question in this role. But think about how much you've advanced that role in the time that you've been there, and how much easier you make everything for other people, and how much, you know, your improvement of the systems make it easier for you to get your job done and do more in the time that you have.
Yeah.
You know, all those things come out of the P, they're in M and L. And, you know, I would say you have a little bit of M in your role, but you have a lot of L and P. And there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, in this day and age and what your role is, P is a big part of what you do.
Yeah.
But if you can make your capacity continue to increase by being smarter and making things work better, and you know, liaising better with the sales team and making it easier for them to get what they need done and all that, then you're doing your role.
Yeah.
And you're doing it really well, you know. Yeah. Others?
I actually found this a little bit of a challenge, considering being like a property manager.
Yeah.
Reason being is because my day can fluctuate from time to time, you know, with what I need to do, and especially having two sort of quite junior real estate agents that sit now under me. I spend a bit of time managing more than leading, and I'd probably like to, it gave me the opportunity to think about the leading portion of it, to be able to create better systems which will bring the producing side of it up for me as well. So, you know, I think I mentioned it when we first started, teach somebody to fish and they never go hungry. So that's sort of getting the staff that I work with thinking that forward thinking, and having them being part of that leadership as well, to be able to create systems that are better producing for us as a team. So I only did that this morning in a meeting that we did this morning, that I wanted them to think about something and we would move forward from there in a week. But yeah, it was an interesting exercise because my day is so different from day to day, depending on what pops up in each portfolio.
Sure.
On desk.
Yeah, but the concept for you is the same as Caroline. You know, the more we think about how we improve systems and how we make it easier for other people and ourselves to do the job, the more we're able to do, then the more we are using M&L in our capacity, in our role. And you know, doing that sort of stuff is using your M&L.
Yeah, I agree. But yeah, but it's something that it needs to be at the forefront. I need to think about it more instead of just running with scissors, so to speak, sometimes.
Yeah. Yeah, well, that's the idea of this. You know, if you look at it and you go, well, I'm spending 80% of my time on P, and I've got some people working with me who aren't as productive as they could be, then you realize you need to spend more ML time. You know, the whole idea of leverage means that you've got people behind you doing things, and leverage only works if they're productive, right? So if you spend all your time producing and they're not as productive as they can be, then you're not really doing a great job. If you've got, you know, 3 staff or 2 staff under your charge and they're only at 60 or 80%, it doesn't matter that you're at 100, because when you add it all up, you're nowhere near as well as if they were at 80 to 100. you know, and producing a lot more and allowing you to have some more time to work on M&L, particularly L, which is, you know, really improving systems and getting more production capability, then we do achieve a lot more.
Yeah.
And just the whole idea is to be conscious of your PML and think, well, hang on, I am too much in P, and I need to get more into ML. So how am I going to do that? I want to spend more time in L. I do manage people when I need to. I have some processes in place, but I don't really spend enough time looking at our systems to make sure that we are getting better at what we do. I don't spend enough time reviewing the people who work for me to see how productive they are. I don't review their work until they're on holidays and then it's too late. So I'm going to devote a bit more time to make sure that every week I do some M, I do some L, whatever it might be. That's the way you sort of think about this and how you get through task 10, which is to change your PML. Who others?
Bradley, just following on from sort of what you've said and what Caro mentioned about her own role, I think it kind of, this PML thing lines up with the circle of influence and circle of concern, because if someone like, let's say Caro's role is predominantly, yes, she does produce a lot, but if she's working within her circle of influence, she's actually becoming a leader within her role, and she actually is doing a better job within her circle of influence, so that, you know, for someone like me, I don't have to get involved in real-time agent on a daily basis, because Caro's using her influence and her skill set to be able to manage the people and lead the people who need to be doing those roles. Same with Beth, you know, she's managing and leading the comms team so that therefore I can focus on other things. And, you know, in this sort of ebb and flow of the percentages, like you said, you know, if we get into spring and, you know, things become really busy and then I start to process listings and stuff like that, you know, yes, it's okay for that time, but the ideal scenario is that, you know, Amy growing is becoming the leader in the CT space, and she can do that. And, you know, it then lessens the amount of time that I then have to spend, you know, sort of putting out the fires or saving that team, because she can then, you know, become the leader in her own space, I guess I'm trying to say. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Anyway, I'll stop talking now.
Just adding on to that as well, what Sarah was saying, we're all going together. So Kara and Sarah, I think it also a big thing has been like just even thinking like or reflecting these last 6 months, how much these percentages have changed just because of COVID alone. You know, I could easily say that 6-7 months ago, you know, my role specifically would probably be more M&L, whereas now I've become much more of a producer, and obviously that has to do with, you know, what we have to try to get through in a day with the resources that we have now as well. And I think, you know, now that we're starting to sort of see the other side of the tunnel, the light at the end, now it's, you know, figuring out how do we adjust those percentages so that way we can go back to leading and, you know, figuring out what's next as well.
Yeah, definitely the times change things and situations change things, and somebody goes on annual leave and you spend more time being a producer than you might otherwise be. But even during that time, when somebody's away and you're doing their job, you learn to see what they're doing well and not doing and how it could be improved. And that leads to some better L for when they come back. Others, any other comments?
Yeah, I must admit, I certainly resonate with that last comment, especially on the impacts of COVID. And we had a couple of people leave our firm or decide to resign in February, kind of a manager level. And I guess the initial plan pre-COVID, pre the recruitment business becoming a lot more difficult, was probably move me into more of a less P role and into slightly weighted more towards the M. But I guess in the last 6 months, it's probably been a bit difficult to facilitate that. So yeah, certainly some impacts.
Yeah, and you know, often your management can come back and say, well, you're not doing the job we want you to do. And you say, well, yeah, because I'm caught on P, because you don't have the resources around me to do it. And then their response is, well, why didn't you tell us that? And we expect you to be doing more of the M&L, and you're just doing P. And it, you know, so it can be a bit of a vicious circle as well, you know. And you know, probably the most relevant example we have is Sarah, because at times she is P, and she says that, you know, like we got such a backlog, we have to, you know, do something, and we'll agree that she's just going to focus on CT work for a few weeks to get over a backlog. And in this situation, it's a lot longer. And I'm doing a lot more P, through COVID than I would do normally. I spent at least an hour today doing permits for people. Like, like that's hard to believe, isn't it? If you had asked me a year ago, I'd say, "Wow, what are you talking about?" But it's the way it is. All right. Your next exercise, I'd love to know what the magic is to get this thing to go to the next slide. Well, sometimes enter works ahead, sometimes it doesn't.
Maybe I should bring back some of those 80 slides for everyone with the clip art.
Yeah. Maybe you could spend a few minutes, everyone, just think about what do you need to do differently to adjust your PML to get to where you want it to be. Think about what are the things that you can innovate in your work life to get more of the balance that you want to get in it. What are the things, like, Ed's comment about is maybe now that we're coming out of COVID, whatever is, if we are, is encourage management to reemploy the person at that level so he can focus more, and that's a strategy. Living within your circle of influence, how do you influence the situation around you to live more in your PML? So spend a couple minutes on that, please. Okay, everybody. Anyone come up with what they think are some clever things to help them get from their current to their should be PML? Anyone want to share?
Brad, it's Mike. I think given the year we've had, it's really been difficult to stick to an ideal week because there's a lot of activities that you would ideally do in that week in a normal setting that we haven't been able to do. And I think it's, I guess, reframing and getting back to that now that things are opening up and we perhaps can do more of those activities. And I also think, just resetting on the 10s and 25s and things like that, that again, we perhaps some of those things we weren't able to do that we can now, and put us in a better mental frame to be more productive and to carry out those critical tasks that we need to.
Yeah, for sure. Certainly been a weird year. Who else?
Yeah, Bradley, I thought for me it would be to just look at the first two habits, if you like. Just be proactive and focus on the end game.
Yeah, very much so. And try to think of some specific, initiatives you can do that fit within those to help you live within that PML more. It's good to say begin with the end in mind, but what can you actually do to make sure that you are doing that? And, spending more time on preparation of things before you go and talk to people, or, spending a little more time on planning than you might otherwise do. Those sort of things, help you do that. Others?
Yeah, Bradley. Again, with the idea of knowing what the end game is, I wrote down a few steps towards achieving this, but then I put set a timeline, make it a goal, so make it happen by planning for it, which is something I probably wouldn't have done before. So
yeah, good. Others? Okay, well, as we finish up PML, I just want you to think, we're going to recap Covey in a little bit, but this isn't a concept you do in 5 minutes. Like if you really think about it and you want to become more effective in your job, you really have a really good look at your PML and think about where you really need to be in it and what can I do to really get more out of production, more into M&L, or if I am in production, how can I spend more time making sure my production is the most effective it can be? How can I make it easier to get things done that I have to do? How can I streamline the process so I can do more and feel more productive and help more people? And, so no matter what you're in, you can spend more time getting better at your job than you are. And if you only spend time in P, you just don't get better. You just don't get better. You don't advance it at all. So we've sort of worked our way through understanding the levels up to managerial, and our last level is this at an organizational level. I've lost my pointer again. At an organizational level, what we're trying to understand, and this is the highest level now, is what is our meaning? Why are we here? What do we stand for as an organization? Covey's belief, integrity, is what we're really there. It's what we're there for. Spiritual is more meaning about, what's the purpose? Are we just here for profit, or are we actually here to, provide service? Are we here to why does our organization exist, and why do we feel part of it? And understanding that, and I believe in our values, and I believe in our mission of being an industry leading repeat and referral business. Our vision of being best practice in everything we do, gives us all something to strive for. It gives us meaning to live up to those values. It gives us strive to get better and better at what we do. the awards that we've applied for over the journey is really to reinforce that internally and externally that we are. And I remember it's funny when we built our first, so Fletcher's had a, you know, from 1996 probably until I got there in 2002, they had a website that was the old brochureware, really. It was just a brochure, you know, and it was pretty crappy. And when I got there, one of the first things I did is I built our new website with New Litho, now Neo as they're known. And I said to the sales team, you know, this is the best website out there, right? And David Taylor, and I didn't even know about the REIV awards, and he came to my room with the flyer from REIV at the time saying their REIV awards for excellence are on, and if our website's as good as you say, why don't we apply for best website? And we did, and we won. And it's just that validation that what you're doing is on the right path. It gives people that sense of comfort that, you know, it's being recognized externally. The principle that is associated with an organization being successful is the term alignment, which is this things happening in the right pace, and we'll talk about that. But it's all about, you know, everything is about the systems that exist in the organization being as good as they can be, continually being advanced through the use of intelligent information, etc. And alignment is a very simple concept, and, you know, kind of a critical principle to make it all work. And I'm just going to click them all through because it's sort of easy to almost see when you see it like this. You know, if we start with the end in mind, what's our goals? What are we trying to achieve? And so if I look at an individual, in this case, an employee, and this is sort of the alignment of an employee as an example of alignment. If we start with that employee and we say, well, what are they trying to achieve to be successful? What's their KPIs? What are their key success factors to be successful? And then we remunerate to try to achieve that. So we might have a bonus structure in place that helps achieve it, or they might be commission earning salespeople who help achieve that, or they might just be on a base that allows them to achieve that goal plus some sort of bonus or whatever. We have to evaluate how they're progressing. We then have to offer training and development to support what the evaluation is saying, like you're really good, but you're missing this bit. We need you to improve on here. We need you to do a bit more training on here, etc. Obviously, as we flow down, we have to have information about the role, what they're doing, how they're doing all of that. They have a role description, says what the role is about. They have tasks that they do. And when you build back up, you know, or down, it just means that things are flowing in the right direction. For example, if you want a salesperson to achieve more GCI, to be honest, you don't raise their base and lower their commission. You give them an ever increasing commission percentage to encourage them to bill more and write more. You can't have an evaluation of somebody and say that these are your weaknesses, but we don't have anything to do to help you with that. We're just gonna leave it there and let you know that you got some weaknesses. So it's all about, you know, another example, you know, is bringing in a new phone system and saying, all right, well, we've done our due diligence and we've worked out that this is the best phone system. And when we bring it in, we then have to make sure it's installed properly. And once it's installed properly, we need to make sure that we have the materials for training. Then we have to train people on how to use it. And we have to follow up to see that people are using it. And if they're not, how we address that. And in there somewhere, having the right service people if there's a problem, having a local hero within Fletcher's somewhere in that alignment who knows how to really use the system really well, having a hero in each office who can make sure people know how to use it. All those things are alignment. All those things are just trying to give the organization a chance to succeed in what it's trying to do. Does that make sense to you guys? So we are really, at this point, we've spent a lot of time on the whole win-win as an organization, which is what we've been doing, is looking through the whole leadership paradigm is to see how we can create an organization that can work together, and that we can have people who are being productive and have people who are enjoying what they do and being more successful and so forth. And we get now to our fifth and my favorite habit, which is seek first to understand, then to be understood, which is incredibly powerful for so many reasons. And I hope there's a video here, and I'll let Covey start you off on it. Uh-oh. It's not loading. You've been signed out. Signed out of what?
Google maybe switched.
I struggle with this every time. What is my passwords? It's not the right. I know you think my old-fashioned way of working, Sarah, is old-fashioned, but it's reliable. Oh. Okay.
It was a dark and stormy night. Captain, wake up. Oh, what is it? Sorry to waken you, sir, but we have a serious problem. Well, what is it? There's a ship in our sea lane about 20 miles away, and they refuse to move. Tell them to move. Sir, we have. They won't move. I'll tell them. Signal goes out. Move starboard 20 degrees at once. The signal returns. Move starboard yourself 20 degrees at once. I can't believe this. I mean, I'm a captain. Let them know who I am. I am important. Signal goes out. This is Captain Horatio Hornblower, the 26th, commanding you to move starboard 20 degrees at once. Signal returns. This is Seaman Carl Jones, the 3rd, commanding you to move starboard 20 degrees at once. What arrogance. Who is this joker? I mean, we're a battleship. We could just blow them. Let them know who we are. Signal goes out. This is the mighty Missouri, flagship of the 7th Fleet. The signal returns. This is the lighthouse. That's a true story, by the way. It's found in the Naval Proceedings Manual, where they literally interpreted a lighthouse to be a ship. But I like the story because it helps me introduce this subject, that there are laws of nature or lighthouse principles that govern life. We think we govern it. We may let our values govern our behavior, but the consequences of that behavior is governed by those lighthouse principles. One of which is that there are 4 parts to our nature: our body, our mind, our heart, and our spirit. And that all 4 parts represent 4 capabilities, 4 needs, 4 intelligences, 4 dimensions that need to be honored and respected and integrated and put into a synergistic whole. In doing so, it can help a person find his or her voice and also inspire others to find his or her voice. Voice is when your talent and your passion, you know, what you're good at and what you love doing, overlaps what the world needs. What can drive your economic engine? Or if you're in a not-for-profit, what adds value? What contributes? As driven by conscience, body, mind, heart, and spirit, all four integrated together. This is called the Indian talking stick. It was given to me by Indian chiefs after training them for several days. They run Indian nations in North America, the States and Canada. They even gave me my name, Bald Eagle. It's authentic, specially carved, beautiful. But you could use a pencil, you could use a spoon, a conch, anything. The whole idea of it, and they taught this to the founding fathers, most powerful communication idea and technique I have ever found, ever. How many are frequently in meetings where you can just feel the hidden agendas operating? I always like to break that down fast. I always like to heal divisions in your own family. Two kids that are quarreling with each other. Just do this. You just go up and you say to the other person, you've got the talking stick. I can't say anything. Maybe I can ask a question to see if I do understand your point, but I can't make my point. I can't agree. I can't disagree. All I can do is communicate until you feel understood. As soon as you feel understood on your point, then you pass the talking stick or pencil or whatever to me. Now it is my turn. And you are quiet and you listen with empathy until I feel understood. As soon as I feel understood, I pass it back to you. Until you feel understood, then you pass it back to me. Now what happens is literally it transforms defensive, negative energy into creative, transforming energy. Here's why. When you really listen to another in depth until they feel understood, you are communicating their worth, their potential. You are affirming them. It is so therapeutic, so healing, that they cannot fight you, and they gradually become more and more open. Try it tonight with your loved one. You see two kids fighting, just walk up to the smaller one and say, honey, you've got the pencil. No one can talk until you feel understood. And then, as soon as you feel understood, and we make your point to your satisfaction, then you pass it to your older sister or brother. Just try it. You think it takes time? It will save so much time. And in your meetings that you go to, basically you say, let's agree to the simple ground rule that no one can make their point until they restate the other person's point to his or her satisfaction.
Okay, I want to talk about the fifth habit for a little while now, and Hubby's two videos make the point. One is, until you understand where that other person is coming from, in example, the lighthouse, it's very difficult to make your point. And second part of his talk is a tool to help get that out. The idea of seek first to understand before trying to be understood is, if you don't do that and you're at cross purposes, somebody's got a different view than you, and you're trying to persuade them to your view, first of all, if you don't really understand their view well and why they've reached that view, your arguments often are going to miss the boat. They're not going to actually deal with their objection or their problem. For salespeople, this should be a natural, and this is a really great, incredible tool to be more effective, right? Firstly, where are they coming from? If I can understand where they're coming from and I understand why they're coming from that position, I have a much greater chance of influencing them to potentially change that position to what I'm trying to get across. Or I might understand their position better now and go, oh, okay, I have a better view of that now. And I understand where you're coming from and I agree with you. Maybe we need to do a little bit of a twist to get it to fully match up, but you've moved me now because I understand where you're coming from. Or I've moved you because you understand where I'm coming from. If we want to get people on the same page, greatest way to do that is to understand where they're coming from and why. A lot of times people, for example, in sales, I teach when we run Fletcher's Way, we always teach the idea that you shouldn't be answering questions if you don't know where they're coming from. So for example, if somebody says, simple example, is it a big backyard? And, does the property have a big backyard? And typical second wave salespeople love to say, yeah, it's got a big backyard. Well, we're not interested in a property with a big backyard. We don't really want any maintenance. So thank you, goodbye. You'd be far more effective to say, instead of answering the question, you'd be more effective to say, well, firstly, how would you define a big backyard? Like, what do you mean by that? Because how do you define that? A big backyard to one person is maybe not the same as it is to someone else. And they can define it and say, well, ideally, is that what you're looking for? Well, no, actually, we don't really want a big backyard. So now you have a much greater chance of actually honing in. It's the same thing when someone says, I'm not going to use Fletcher's because so-and-so has greater market share. And our immediate reaction is to try to overcome that, but there's no use until we understand what does that mean to them. Well, firstly, how have you come to that conclusion, and how do you think that affects their ability or our ability to actually sell your property? So you can start to understand where they're coming from. Well, because they've sold more properties in this price range, they would clearly have more buyers than you. Right. And is that something that this agent has told you, or is it something that you guys have, reached your own conclusions from? And then you can start to deal with it and understand, well, that's where they're coming from, is because another agent said, well, we sell more properties in this range, therefore we have more buyers. And you're able to start to deal with that effectively as a salesperson. If you just launch in and you start just saying things, you might miss the mark completely and you don't have any chance of overcoming that objection. Seeking first to understand is an incredibly powerful tool. And I remember I had a managing partner I worked with in a law firm who was very, very strategic, very smart man. And we were going to a meeting with a whole bunch of partners who had were at the firm, and many which had joined the firm in a preceding couple of years of massive growth. And the purpose of this was to talk to lots of them to see what views they had on. And he just said, I'd really like to know what your views are about this topic. And they would chirp out their views. And he'd say, that's great. Now I'd like to know about this topic. And then all he really did was synthesize their comments and regurgitate it back to them in a sound, logical approach. And they all said, wow, this guy is so incredibly strategic. And to be frank, all he did was seek first to understand. So he was able to really articulate back to the people in the room in a voice that they could hear, because it was their words, what they really wanted and how we could do it. And seek first to understand before trying to be understood is such an incredibly powerful tool to relate to other people. And what I ask you guys to really do is to take this on board, this habit, and really think about it in every circumstance. Instead of trying to shout somebody down, try to understand where they're coming from. You know, the other day, well, yesterday now, Andrew Patterson and I were having a conversation, and he raised something that I didn't really agree with as an approach. And I said, well, I don't see how that can be the right approach. And he said, well, these are the reasons why we think it is the right approach. And I said, all right, well, what I think you should do is call up a couple of the directors and ask them for their opinion, because they're the ones who will be affected by this, and see what they have to say. And then he texts me back to say, I'm going to set up a Zoom session so we can meet with 3 or 4 at one time and talk about it. I said, that's fine. And at the end of the day, we'll get the right outcome because we're all talking about it. It's always like that. You know, if you're not listening to the other party, you don't know why they think something or where they're really coming from. And the more you can, and this is something that works incredibly well at home as well as in the office in relating to people. You know, when somebody doesn't want to do something, or somebody has a different view than you, there's nothing more powerful than trying to let them explain why they have that and what's behind your thinking and how have you reached that conclusion, and how can I, you know, come to understand that better. And oh, is there stuff you can show me? Great. Because ultimately, if you can get your head around their whole reasoning, then you can often then influence them, because number one, you've taken the time to do that. You do understand their argument. And now you have an ability to either agree or shoot down their argument because you actually understand it. Beforehand, you really didn't understand it. You just knew that they had a position different than you. And you're trying to overcome that, you know, by just being clever. And that's not as smart as being focused on, well, why do they think that? Why do they think it's better to go with an agent who has more market share in that area? Why is it better, you know, to do X rather than Y? Why do they think that? And I used this example earlier in one of our sessions about overcoming objections, and even in the workplace with, say, partners or directors or others who don't want to do something, or want to do something a way that we don't think is the right way to do it. And the best way to do that is to, first of all, go in and understand where they're coming from. And why did they think that? Why have they come to that conclusion? Why do they think that's the way to do it? And then once you've done that, say, well, let me maybe shed some more light on this, because I don't think maybe you have all the facts now that you've said that X is a factor that maybe you weren't aware of. Oh, really? Wow. Yeah, well, forget it. Changed my mind completely. But you can only get to that place when you understand where they're coming from. And the more you can, you know, we say to salespeople, it's the 80-20 rule, you know, listen 80% of the time and talk 20. The more questions you can ask, the more positions that you know their answer before you answer yourself, the more chance you have of getting to the end game and winning. The more times that you guess because you think you know the answers. For example, another sales one we use a lot in the training is, you know, should I auction my property? Well, the stupid salesperson says, yes, absolutely, your property's ideal for auctioning. The more enlightened salesperson says, well, how do you feel about auctions? Because just because a house might be suitable for auction, if the people that live in it hate auctions, the last thing you want to do is say we should have an auction. You know, because you're not going to win. You're just going to see the people making eye contact with each other and saying, yeah, let's fuck this guy off. Sorry. Because that's ultimately what's going to happen. So if you were to say to them, well, how do you feel about auctions? And they say, well, we're not so sure. We've had some success, but we go to lots of auctions. They seem very stressful. Say, well, how about we talk about it? Let's talk about the pros and cons of having an auction. And collectively, we can make a decision, because ultimately, it's your property. You have to feel comfortable at the end of the game with not just the outcome, but the process. And the more you understand about it, and the more informed you are of your choice about having one or not, then the better we're going to feel about it. Yeah, but what do you think? I think that every house is potentially auctionable or not. I think it's entirely up to circumstances with the vendors and how they feel and their timing and all sorts of things. So let's talk through that. and let's try to come to what is the right position for you guys. You're going to win a lot more listings that way. You know, somebody taught me when I first came in that and I've always taught this when it comes to pricing. And one of the main reasons why you lose a listing is you over or underprice property relative to what they think. You underprice it compared to other agents, or you overprice it compared to what they think, and they think you're just trying to buy the listing. So the most powerful way to win a listing is to price it with them. Is to sit down and say, well, when it comes to price, the best guide we have is the comparables that are in the market. So let's have a look together at some recent sales. Let's have a look at those properties. Let's see how yours compare to those properties. You might have been in some of those, and we can collectively together come up with what we think is the right price. Because ultimately, it's not about what you paid for it or about what you put into the house. It's about what an enlightened buyer out in the marketplace is prepared to pay for that. And that is based on what else is selling. What's on the market that they can spend their money on, and what's sold recently that they're going to compare it to and say, well, hang on, this house is a lot better, or this house. So let's do this together. You can't go wrong in pricing a property together, but you can certainly go wrong in saying to someone, well, I think your house is worth 1.8, when they've been told it's worth 1.9 by 3 other agents, or they themselves think it's worth 2.2, you know, because they're out of whack. Does that make sense? So it's a really super powerful concept to think about, is the 5th habit of Covey. And it's not one that comes to mind naturally. It's a bit like begin with the end in mind. The 2nd and the 5th habits are the 2 most powerful ones, I believe, and the ones that people would least think about in their normal day-to-day, you know, existence. We don't start things with the end in mind, and we don't try to seek to understand where the other person is coming from before we try to influence them to where we want them to be and the outcome we want to get at the end. Comments about the 5th habit?
I think if you think about it, it helps you sort of remember that not everyone thinks the same as you. And everyone's motivated by different things, I guess. So, you know, you might assume, oh, everyone just cares about money, but in fact, that's not true. In the situation, they may care about the relationship more, or the, you know, the working environment more, or something like that.
Definitely. No, I agree with that comment 100%. We're all different. And that's what I said in, you know, one of the earliest sessions, is that, you know, we can think about, we can just experience something, but my memory of it and yours is very different. My interpretation of it and yours is very different. We can sit in the same room and have a conversation about your performance, and your view of it is completely different from what I just said. And it happens all the time. And, you know, to assume we know how to motivate the people around us is not true, because Sarah's completely right. Some people, it's not about money. Some people, it's about job satisfaction. It's about respect. It's about fulfillment. Some others, it's about money. It's about the recognition of money. You know, we're talking to Ben and Rob this morning from our Blackburn office, and they don't like the way we do the property management payments for salespeople who bring in leads. They'd rather us give them a voucher straight away, so it's in their hand and they see the money and they think, yes, I want to get another property on the rent roll. And that's their interpretation of what motivates a salesperson. It doesn't matter that it goes in their bank. They'd rather have a voucher in their hand right now. It's worth more, even if it's the same dollar value. And, you know, I can't argue with that. They're salespeople. That's their view. And, but I don't think that way. You know, I'd rather have the money in the bank where it's there and I don't have to deal with it, and I don't have to spend this voucher before I lose it. You know, I don't have to go through the process of remembering the password and, you know, all that. We're all different. Other comments about 5th habit?
I think in property management, I think this is something that we naturally do, that we seek information first from tenants, from landlords, from prospective landlords. We have to, our job is such a problem-solving job that we have to actually hear the information. And I think that a good property manager seeks the information first before they actually speak. You normally find that when somebody's in heightened with a situation within the property that they live in, sometimes they have to actually get all of that information out, and they just want to keep repeating the same thing. And you have to be able to hear what they're trying to say and understand what is actually going on behind the scenes for them and why they've become so heightened in it, and then seek to be able to solve it for them and give them that solution. I have this pushed at me quite a bit within our office, because Scott is very, very powerful with this particular part of COVI. And when we decided to change a lot of the processes, his was, okay, Sandy, now tell me why you want this. What is your end result? So he sort of really has embedded it in us quite a lot. So it makes a lot more sense with what you're talking about. So it's good. It's a really good concept. I like it.
Great. Well, Scott's a past graduate of this program, and glad I could use my circle of influence to influence him to think in abundance mentality and to think that way. Others, any other comments on that?
Bradley, it's Ian. I think if you don't understand what they're coming from or their situation, as a salesperson, it's going to backfire on you potentially, because you'll be leading down a path, whether they've got a time frame to sell, so they really need, say, an auction deadline, but you're so focused on other things by not asking the question that you go down a private sale and 6 weeks later they're still on the market, and then the bank's knocking a week later. So I think you can't diagnose to fix the problem if you haven't asked the questions to start with and listened to the why.
Yeah, when I was first at Fletcher's, Jeremy Desmere was a young sales guy, and we got on very well very quickly. And in the first year, about the first year, he came into my office and he said, I owe you an apology. And I said, what for? He said, well, it's really taken me a year to seek first to understand before trying to be understood. And now that I'm asking a lot of questions and listing appointments, I'm just smashing it. I used to just talk at people, and now I ask questions. And the more I ask, the more I understand before I speak. Because my view is every time you answer someone's question, if you don't know where they're coming from, you have a 50-50 chance.
Yeah.
And if you know where they're coming from, you could increase that to close to 100% of getting the right answer. And that's why in any environment, you want the right answer for when somebody's addressing something with you, whether it's a landlord, a tenant, a prospective vendor, whatever it might be. Any other comments before we continue on?
Yeah, hi, Bradley, it's Sue.
I see.
Hi. I think that's, I'm really focusing on that point because I'm in sales, and we tend to go in there sometimes and be blurting out everything that we know instead of stopping and taking the time. We've got 2 ears and 1 mouth, and so we should be listening twice as hard and not speaking twice as much. I think I've just got to remember to do that when I'm doing a lot of my presentations, because as you know, we're competing a lot for business and everything, and you want to get everything out and, tell them what we think and our point of view. But it's really important to just stop and listen to what they've got to say and try and find out what they've been told and what our point of difference is, and try and come at it from that angle. I know Nathan and I went and did a appraisal on Saturday, and that vendor had 15, she'd contacted 15 stylists.
Good.
And she was just confused and everything.
As you would be.
Yeah. So it's really important to ask the right questions, listen to the answers coming back, and then you've got the opportunity to really get them on board, because you're listening to them and actually giving them the answers they want and they need to help them make a decision.
Yeah, and the more you ask questions and they tell you things in their language, and the more you use that language back at them, the more synergy you create, the more you're on the same wavelength, etc. So there's more reasons than just, the asking. You sort of understand them a lot better. All right, thanks everybody for your comments. Our 6th habit and our ability to ultimately become interdependent with people is synergy. And synergy, in a really simple term, is 1 and 1 equals 3. If there's lots of stuff on it. We're just going to very briefly do, Covey's team, but together everyone achieves more, which is a really nice acronym for team. But you think about it, that if Sandy has an idea, and I'm sure some of the things that have been said today by Sue or Ian or Sandy or whoever have led you to think about other things. And if I was to say to you guys, I want you each to write down 5 things or 10 things that you've learned during COVID about yourself. And some of you might get to 10, some of you might stop at 5 and not really know how else to answer it. If we then put all of those answers up on the board, or we had each person read off their answers, a lot of you are going to go, oh, I didn't think of that. Yeah, and then when Sandy says, I've learned to be more independent, and Ian goes, yeah, I didn't think about that. But not just independent, I've learned how to be more interdependent with other people. And Sandy goes, yeah, actually, that's what I mean. It's more interdependent. And so like you go back and forth, and all of a sudden your 5 ideas or 10 ideas or 12 ideas, and they're better ideas than they were before. And that's the whole power of, brainstorming things together, is that together we achieve more. Together in a room, I hear something you've said, and, I mentioned really early in this that I had the opportunity to do a lot of work with Edward de Bono, who's the great thinker, coined the term lateral thinking, and he's, shaped the way people think and learn how to think and learn how to be lateral in their thinking. And once I was in about a 4 or 5 hour workshop in the city of Melbourne in 1995 or 96, where he was facilitating all the CEOs in the city. So all the businesses in the city, CEOs were invited to spend half a day, including lunch, at Melbourne Town Hall to brainstorm how we could bring the city of Melbourne back to life. And you're at your table, and you had a electronic device where you could write your answers down at your table to questions that Edward de Bono was asking. And then those answers went up on a ticker tape screen that circled the whole room with ideas. And so as that question was being asked and your answers were being written down on this tablet, you could see them up on the wall, and everybody in the whole room could see those ideas. And you could see the ideas and go, oh, hey, we hadn't thought about that. And then that made us think about something else. And we came up with literally, honestly, hundreds and hundreds of ideas of how the city of Melbourne could be revitalized. And in 1996, there was no apartments in the city. There were no markets in the city. There was no life after 5:30 in the city, Monday through Thursday. There was evening shopping on a Saturday. It closed down at 12:30. There was nothing if you worked in downtown Melbourne in that era. It was just a place to go to work and go home, like downtown LA used to be, the same. And now look at downtown Melbourne. We all know the Docklands and South Bank and the whole apartment scene in the city and all the restaurants and all the shows that are there and all the things you have to to support people who live near you, as opposed to people who just work near you. More restaurants, more shops, more supermarkets, laundries, dry cleaners, all those things that you need, chemists, and all the things you need when people are there 24/7. None of that was there. And I can tell you that so much of that came out of that session we had with the City of Melbourne, who then created their blueprint for the year 2010, 2020 for the City of Melbourne, which came out of that session. And the whole idea is that we do learn from each other. We get better from each other. If Caroline comes into my office with an idea and she poses it to me and I say, yeah, but what about this or that? And she said, oh yeah, I hadn't thought about that. That's great. And her idea made me think of something. And then my idea makes her think of something. She goes out of there with a better idea than she came in with. I'm more energized. I understand her position better. We all grow. And the whole idea of synergy is that if you work in a positive way with others, you work in a win-win situation, you seek first to understand, and we synergize with each other in that we learn from each other, we grow from each other, we look to advance each other, then we're going to be very successfully interdependent. Moms and dads are very different. And if moms and dads can work together to create a really great household, working off the strengths of both of them. So if mom's more sensitive and she helps dad be a little more sensitive, and if dad's more practical and he helps her be a little more practical, or vice versa. If she's a really good cook and helps make him a better cook because he needs some help on that, or if he's better at some fixing things and she wants to learn to be doing some fixing things to build things with the kids, and you help her do that, you all just get stronger and you synergize and you create a better family environment. If you don't complement each other's skills, in other words, if they're very mutually exclusive, then you don't build better. You have two people who are very different and don't work together to create a better household. That makes sense. Sally's more organized since she's met me. I'm better at relaxing and I'm better at cooking since I met her. She's better at so many things than I am in terms of artistic and design. She's helped me to see things. I went in my backyard this morning I was up at usual time, very early. And as soon as the sun came up, I went outside and I looked around our backyard, which is incredibly tropical, beautiful backyard, all full of palm trees and swimming pool. And she did all that because when we moved in here, we didn't have any of that. And she said to me one day, "We're going to have this." And I said, "Really? We have a whole backyard of trees. We're going to cut all those down?" And she said, "Yeah, they're horrible." I said, "Yeah, they're not very nice." But I would have never thought that. I would never replace what we had, but she gave me a vision of what it could be. And now I love it. And the synergy is that I've grown so much as a result because I listened to her, and vice versa. And do you do that with your colleagues? Do you do that with your partner? Do you make them better? Together, do you come up with 1 and 1 equals 3? Or is 1 and 1 always minus, is it always 1.5 because you guys don't work together? You cut each other down, you don't help each other, you don't respect their strengths. Do you go into a listing appointment with a colleague and you don't let them do something they do really well because you want to control it all? I was thinking again of, LeBron and Anthony Davis. I mentioned last week, the basketball players who won the championship together because they completely, they support each other. They've synergized to create absolutely 1 and 1 equals 3 between them. They create more because of their environment than other teams where you see 2 stars together, but they don't really complement each other that well. So I think synergy is a really powerful and important habit to focus on. And it's something that when we do Maxwell, our next leadership guru, we're going to do a lot of detail on that sort of stuff. And he helps to give some practical ways of doing some of those things. Anyone have any comments about synergy before we move on?
Just the one thing that comes to mind with this of past team work things that I've done is there's no I in team. So it's about, like you said, remembering, listening to the other members of the team and working together to build a stronger team. And, you might be hell-bent on doing something this way, but just be open to hearing another point of view. And when you're so controlling and everything, it's, like I say to some of the guys with the appraisals and everything, it's not about us. It's nothing to do with us. It's about the client. It's everything for the client. It's about us doing what we do to get the best price for the client. And an agent said something to me the other day, and I said, "Well, do you think that was really the best thing for the client?" And they said, "Well, I got paid. That's all I care about." And I thought, oh, that just makes me cringe because I just don't think like that at all. I just think I want to do everything I can to get the best result for my vendor and for the process to be as fault-free and as a good experience for them as I can. Like, is that always possible? No, it isn't, but that's our end goal that we want. We want to achieve the best price and have a good experience because it's a big thing. It's a stressful thing. It's probably one of the most stressful things they do. So it's about us trying to make that as seamless and fault-free as we can. And that's from not me doing the opens and me doing it, but it's for the marketing girls, the girls that put on the internet, the receptionist that answers the phone, me at the front door, giving them, taking their names and numbers, getting back to them, giving feedback to the vendors. It's a team effort, and if we all work together to achieve that and stop focusing on ourselves, then we'll achieve the best result in the end.
Excellent, Lise, well said. And that's what this whole team thing is. And remember the acronym, guys. Together, everyone achieves more. It's a great one to remember. You always think about that. It's a very powerful one. Our 7th habit and our last habit is sharpen the saw. And sharpen the saw is a very simple thing. It just means continuous improvement. It means what do you got to do to keep improving, keep moving along. Remember, if you stay still, you're going backwards. If you don't get any better in the sales process, next year you're going to write less because other people are getting better around you. If you don't get better at property management and take on the new tools and the new technologies that are being offered, then you're a dinosaur. We all have to keep learning, growing, getting better, working to improve ourselves, improve every system we work with, improve every office, because if not, you're just going backwards. And the 7th habit, which fills in the whole continuum, is about that. And I really encourage you guys all to think about spending a little bit of time each year, as you're doing right now, but getting better, building your PC, staying up to date with things, belonging to the Tom Panos gym and listening to his stuff, getting on the Lee Woodward Hot Topics and listening to his stuff, working, going to the right, seminars, listening to the right PM leaders, Fiona Blaney and things that she talks about, learning from them. If you do all that, then you keep moving ahead and you keep getting better. Otherwise, you go backwards. So, I really encourage that sort of thinking.
Create your dream with Success Television. Can people truly change, reinvent themselves into more balanced, more caring, more productive individuals? Stephen Covey, for one, says yes. And a lot of people pay a lot of money for his brand of reinvention. In fact, leaders of corporations, all kinds of organizations, pay $500 million a year for his brand of reinvention. Covey himself is a former Brigham and Young University business professor who has turned himself into a self-help mogul. And his first lesson for leaders is that they are the product of their own choices. Okay, let's start then with the 7 principles. And the first one, obviously, is to be proactive. And what fascinates me is that it jives with this notion that you're not a captive of your past.
Right.
Describe that for us.
Well, most people tend to become deterministic, that they are a captive of their past or of their present circumstances or of the social weather that surrounds them or their physical weather.
For their family.
Their upbringing, what my parents did to me and so forth. The question I often ask is, are you a product of nature or nurture? And almost everyone says it's nurture or a combination. And I try to make a point that it's neither. It's a product of choice, because you can choose your response to both nature and nurture. You could have, for instance, a genetic disease inside you and never get it, simply because you make the lifestyle choices of the proper food and exercise and medicine. Or you could have been abused as a child. You don't have to abuse your own child. You have the power to reinvent yourself. That's not so with animals. So the space between stimulus and response is the freedom to choose your response.
Let's stop for a second and focus on the space between the stimulus, if you will, or whatever happens to you in your life, and then your response. What is that, a minute second in most instances? Is it something we can expand?
Absolutely, we can expand it. But with some people that have been, say, powerfully deprived or rejected, or maybe there's very little space, see? With others that have had very affirming, unconditional love growing up and so forth, they could have a very large space. The point is, however small or large the space is, it can get larger if you will take responsibility and initiative and focus on it and use it little by little. It gets larger and larger until eventually your response changes the very stimulus of your life. That's why I say that leaders are not born or made, they are self-made.
lots of different names for sharpen the saw. There's things like continuous improvement programs, quality programs, professional development, you know, the current acronym lifelong learning. It's just all about getting better, being proactive in getting better, and realizing that you can focus on achieving more. And when you think about the habits and, you know, proactive, we just talked about, and then your second habit, begin with the end in mind. If you want to have a long lasting, successful career, you want to be a long lasting, successful parent, then you keep growing, you keep learning, you keep developing. You know, I played basketball my whole life. And when I started to coach David in basketball, I went back to the internet and I read and watched video after video and article after article about being a kid's coach, and how to coach basketball to, you know, 9 and 10-year-olds, and then when they were 12, how to coach to 12-year-olds. And I just kept wanting to learn to be a better coach, even though I'd done that my whole life. And that's what you do if you want to get better and better at things. You approach one of these different methods, and you can get better. You got to build it in. So, you know, first things first is building in those big rocks of continuous improvement, so you don't get to the end of the year and say, well, next year is going to be the same as this year because I haven't actually done anything to enhance myself. You know, what have you done in the last 12 months to get better? I mean, obviously you guys are doing this course, but other things, hopefully. I really hope that you bought the Covey book like I asked you to, and that you read it. I hope that you do these exercises. I hope you take away with you to think about living the 7 habits and the various bits of Covey that we've covered. Because if you don't, you know, it's kind of lost for being nothing. I'm going to get you to do this as a homework assignment.
TSTN, the world's only television network dedicated to helping you be more successful. Visit TSTN.com for more information.
I want to suggest 3 challenges. I'm going to put these inside 3 circles. The first circle we'll call personal greatness. The next circle, leadership greatness. And the third circle, organizational greatness. Under personal greatness, I would put the 7 habits leading to finding your voice and inspiring others to find their voice. Only this part, since it's personal, is to find your own voice. I know when I was 20, someone asked me to do management training. Gave me my whole voice for my entire life. I was planning to go into a family business, and I had geared myself to it, but I found such a passion in the other direction. Leadership greatness, modeling the 7 habits leading to the 8th habit of inspiring others to find their voice, affirming them. Leadership is basically communicating people's worth and potential so clearly they come to see it in themselves. Under organizational greatness, mission, vision, values. Now put up the word co-missioning. And at the center, execution. Now, the 3 challenges are these. Get your head out of other people's weaknesses or out of your boss's weaknesses. Don't be sitting here saying, well, this is good stuff, but the person who really needs it isn't here. You are a trim tabber. Take responsibility. Create a culture of responsibility, not blame. The whole purpose of leadership effectiveness is to empower other people so that you help them find their voice. And they are in positions, as Jim Collins puts it, in the right place on the right bus. And then their strength is made productive and their weakness is made irrelevant through the strength of other people because of developing a complementary team. Commissioning, the great tool of bringing together the mission of individuals with the mission of organizations, I suggest is the use of this kind of communication illustrated by the Indian talking stick.
All right, guys, we've done Covey. We've covered a lot of his principles, and I will at some point go back over those, but we've run out of time today. I'm going to put an email out to probably tomorrow morning about doing that task of continuous improvement, but also in the diary note for Wednesday is the DISC information, including a DISC profiling thing that you can do so you can understand what your DISC profile is before Wednesday session. And I ask that you get that done as well. That'll be a big help as we're going to go through and try to understand DISC in more detail. Some of you have done Wednesday's modules in Fletcher's way, but we do them a bit different in this course, and certainly doing the DISC profile yourself will be very helpful for you. So I hope you got a lot out of today, and I hope you enjoyed all the Covey stuff. And as I said, we will recount Covey near the end to just go back through the main principles of it. Any last questions, comments before we finish up? All right, have a good night, everybody. Well
Thanks,
done.
Brendan.
Thank you, Bradley.
Thank you.
Thank you, Bradley.